Recording in progress.
Commissioner Croft.
Present.
Commissioner Phillips.
Present.
Chair Scharf.
Present.
Vice Chair Mater.
Present.
Commissioner Metz.
Present.
5 present.
Okay, so we have a quorum. Are there any agenda changes, additions, or deletions? Nope. All right, seeing none. That way we'll move to public comment. Do we have any members of the public who want to speak on items not on the agenda?
If anyone from the public would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, press *9 or raise your hand now. No hands raised.
All right, seeing no public comment. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move. I second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
In favor. Aye.
Aye.
And that's unanimous. Utilities Directors Report.
Good evening, Chair Scharf, thank you, and Commissioners. A few items that a little talk about here real quick is that one is that on August 19th, Council approved the plan to apply the gas pricing mitigation adder of 5.5 cents. This is, if you remember, this is what we talked about here at the UAC about what should we do about if we're going to, if these gas prices spike again, should we create some revenues and some reserves for this. So we did go to council. They approved the 5.5 cents over the 3 years, which brings in about $4.5 million in the fund. And that will be the offset market. And we left the gas commodity charge at $4 per therm. So anything above $4, then we would be able to use these dollars that we have in holding of this $4.5 million over a 3-year period of time. And then we'll reevaluate at that period of time if we're going to continue or if we're just going to stay with the $4.5 million. Scams are up right now. We're getting more and more customers calling in to our call center about utility scams. They're on the rise. So we wanted to just make a quick blurb on this. We've also put it on our website that, anytime that a customer feels that they are being scammed, they need to call our customer service line to find out exactly what's going on. It could be anywhere from high bill complaint to we're going to shut off their appliance or their meters. And so we just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of from the public standpoint. August 11th was 8/11 call before you dig day, which is a helpful reminder for always to call 811 before you dig on excavating work, avoiding hitting underground utilities and potential dangerous situations. So if you call 811, there's usually a 2-day window that utilities have to come out and actually put markings on the ground wherever you might be doing some work. So like if you're going to replace your fence that might come all the way towards the front of the home, there might be a gas line, there could be a sewer line, or there could be an underground electric if you're in an underground area. So utilities will come out, AT&T comes out, so does Comcast come out. There's different colors of paints, as you've probably seen all throughout the streets. Sunshade program's back for the 9th consecutive year. CPAU is partnering with Business Council on Climate Change, BC3, to promote Bay Area Sunshine Program. CPU customers will receive a discounted price to install residential solar battery storage systems from 2 solar contractors, Solar Union and Solar Technology. And the program runs from September 1 through November the 15th. We have some surveys that are going on right now. We have a business and key account customer service satisfaction, the California Municipal Utility CMUA. We partnered with them for many, many years now. We are every year we go back and forth for surveys for residentials, and then we also do commercials. This year we're actually doing commercials, so we're going to be doing the medium and low and high commercials. Great Blue is the research, and we usually use those numbers and we will break it out. And then we'll come back to the UAC and we'll give out what the final numbers look like and how we compared from last year to this year. We also have a commercial webinar on July the 31st. CPAU hosted a second and free commercial webinar, which had about 25 in attendance. Steve Berman of the Clear Results and information intended about a maximum efficiency and performance of HVAC systems with a special focus on heat pump water heaters. So with that, we had 25 people that came to that webinar. A couple more here. Electric vehicle program. The Peninsula Convention Conservative Center, PCC, was one of the first commercial buildings to go all electric in Palo Alto. Has recently completed its installation of 6 EV charging stations. These are now available for both their staff as well as their visitors. In addition, a condominium complex at 101 Alma has just completed the installation of 97 chargers, one of each tenant parking spaces for that apartment complex. And then staff's also working with potential to bring EV workshops and mini EV expos to the sites to further on for multi-dwelling units throughout the city. And the last thing is that I want to introduce Alan Katora, who is going to be this is his second week here. He is actually our Chief Operating Officer. This is a position that we had not filled it for quite some time. And I felt that it was necessary that we move forward in filling the position this year. And the reason for that is that I've made a decision that I'll be leaving at the end of the year. So I will be retiring. Alan will be here to work with the operational folks and also with all the divisions as we move forward in the coming years. We will, I've had some conversations with Ed, the city manager. We will be putting the position, the director's position out. We are working with an outside consultant right now to work out the details of that. The idea is also too, as I talked to Ed, I thought it would be important that Ed actually comes to the UAC as a whole to find out exactly what you all might want to think about what the next GM should look like, or the director, whatever you want to call it. Because I think it's important as the utilities is shaping, it's totally different than as it started when I first came here, at least. And Alan brings a lot of experience. He comes from Santa Clara. He's got a large, long utility background. And I think that it's important that Ed hears it from all of you. So I think that we're going to try to squeeze it, ladies. I just found out this today, that we have a pretty jam-packed meeting next week or next month in October. We have some consultants, but I also think, though, that it's important for us to, and for all of you to think about what some of the ideas might be of what we would be looking for as we shape this position in the future as it comes open. So I think that he may take a little bit of time to bring that. I encouraged him that he needs to bring it now instead of waiting until November, because it just takes a little bit then that much more time that we won't have a GM or director in place. But I know that between Alan and Kylie, Kylie does still play a part in this, is that I know that if for some reason, if the position isn't filled by the time that I leave in December, I know it's going to be still in good hands. That will be able to move forward in the coming year as we go through. Budget's going to be coming up. We still got a lot of work to do on SCAP as a whole, as you'll hear more tonight from Jonathan as we move through this. So with that, I just wanted to introduce Alan, and I want to thank all of you now, sooner than later, for all your support throughout the time that you've given me as being the director of the utilities. So thank you. And that concludes my report.
All right. Well, that will move on to new business, which is the City of Palo Alto's electrical connection to California transmission grid. We have the staff presentation.
This is Kaylee Burton, Administrative Assistant. Yes, we do have a presentation and we will hear public comment after the presentation.
Correct.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. My name is Lena Perkins, and I'm a senior resource planner with the Utilities Department. I apologize for not being able to join you this evening. This item was originally scheduled for November, and it got moved up, and so I'm just coming back from a pre-scheduled trip. So thank you for allowing me to join remotely. I wanted to give you an update on this important topic, and I will share my screen. And if you could just answer in the affirmative verbally when you can see it. Can you see it?
Looks great.
Great. Okay. And then I'm having it's Dean was plenty loud, but please feel free to speak up. It's a little bit harder to hear you. All right, so this is just a brief presentation update on what the current state of the electrical system and connection to the broader transmission grid is in Palo Alto, and ongoing work, sort of an information item. And then, all right, so as background, the city of Palo Alto is served by 350 kV lines that enter along one corridor. So although there are 3 lines, they are on these 2 structures that you see here. Large one with 2 lines on the left in the photo, and another smaller one with 1 line. And so there are 3 lines, but 2 structures, and they're all very close to each other. So it's along one corridor. This is not ideal to have them along one corridor, since there have been events in the past where all 3 lines were taken out, since they are so close to each other. So in 2022, staff restarted discussions with the California grid operator, that's the California Independent System Operator, California ISO, regarding this reliability issue with the extreme event of something like an airplane crash. But while that provides a potential path forward, staff was advised that it is not uncommon for a community of Palo Alto size to be served by one corridor, and that the extreme event scenario was not, a NERC or FERC compliance issue. And but then following that, the city is actually experiencing load growth, both in the rebound from COVID and largely with large data centers. And that has shown both in internal modeling and at the state level that the expected load growth will trigger a mandated upgrade per NERC reliability standards. And that is expected in the 2025 transmission planning modeling. And then the city is also working with the CEC to revise their forecast further upwards, because the CEC's forecast does not have the additional data center load growth. And we're also working with the independent grid operator to advise them on what our preferred solution to this required upgrade would be. And that would be a connection to the south. So a new corridor rather than reconnecting the existing lines. Staff, CPAU staff was also advised by the ISO that while it is not uncommon for a community of Palo Alto's size to be served by a single corridor, connecting to a single receiving substation is somewhat uncommon and presents a single point of failure at that substation. So both for reliability standards from the broader standpoint, and of course, Palo Alto's, a second receiving substation would be preferable. And then the power flow is also slightly more efficient interconnecting from the south. The reliability incidents, for those that aren't aware, in 2010, a single engine airplane crashed in East Palo Alto, destroyed a home and daycare, and took out all 3 of the transmission lines for 10 to 12 hours. And then, 2 of them were up for 48 hours. This was kind of a best case scenario where there was a prefabricated tower that PG&E helicoptered in. So the service was restored relatively quickly. Still, since there are 2 level 1 trauma centers, they were already in the process of activating their evacuation plans, and the VA hospital was also on the verge of activating their evacuation plan. And if it were to happen today, there are not just extra transmission transformers and towers sitting around. It's a really active period of build out. And so this would probably result even in restoring minimum service, with 1 line for probably a 48 to 72 hour outage. In 2021, a different single engine airplane crashed into 2 inactive wires, but narrowly missed taking out the lines that serve the city as well as those that serve PG&E territory to the south. This would have been a very large outage, affecting much broader region than Palo Alto, and likely in the 3 to 7 day outage range. So the timeline here, most of the growth is in data centers, also some in multifamily housing, and then to a lesser extent, electrifying everything, especially on the residential side. So given that load growth, staff is working and has conversed with and shared various load forecasts and projections and different scenarios with specific projects and substation upgrades and anonymized data center growth or the CEC for them to consider revising the CEC's forecast for Palo Alto. If CEC replaces their forecast with our internal forecast, which they so far seem inclined to do, then that will automatically trigger the NERC-FERC reliability upgrade. So either most likely in the 2025 transmission planning process by the California ISO, they will consider multiple transmission upgrades, and we will put forth our preferred alternative, which is currently a second transmission corridor from the south. We will know if the CEC has adopted our forecast by December 2024, January 2025. And then the transmission planning process by the California ISO is December 2025, again, at the earliest. And then it would be roughly 5 years to be built by PG&E, and the cost would be mostly covered by all PG&E and all ISO ratepayers as a required transmission upgrade. So I guess that's the end of my presentation. So I'll just stop here and ask for any questions.
Commissioners, do we have any questions? Go ahead.
So I think the presentation said it comes into the northwest. It's actually the northeast, direct to the Ravenswood substation corridor there. Couple questions. This came before the council, something like this in 2021. I think at that time it was a SLAC, the idea of to come from that side of the city through SLAC rather than from the southeast through Ames. So my first question would be, what happened to all of that activity back in 2021?
So this was not my responsibility in 2021. But I have had conversations with Stanford and Slack. That is a separate process because that transmission line that comes over from the west across, the Redwoods at Skyline and everything, and it connects to Edgewood Substation and then Stanford, that is owned by the Department of Energy. So the Department of Energy built it, the Department of Energy owns it. And if we wanted to interconnect to it and upgrade it to accommodate that interconnection, we would go through the Federal Department of Energy. It's not out of the question. We tried that for about a decade to 15 years prior to me being involved in this. And there are primarily, the linear accelerator has very unique draws on that line. And then Stanford's generation and transmission situation has changed in the last 10 years. They shut down their power plant at Stanford. And so, now they're a taker and they had an outage. So, we're aware of that and we're talking at the highest levels, but this is probably the fastest path, although it is not being pursued exclusively, working with the ISO process.
Yeah, I guess
Oh, go ahead.
I guess the gist of my question was not exactly what happened to the Slack proposal, but this idea of a second line, including the AIM substation alternative, was presented to the council in 2021. I'm asking, what was the response of the council? No action was apparently taken at that time. Now it's coming back 3 years later. But what happened?
So the reason why council didn't act on that is that staff didn't recommend to use the Slack. And the reason for that is that Slack wanted us to gold plate their substation. So instead of actually being able to do the work that would have made it safe and reliable, they wanted to take it to the very tip top, and they wanted CPAU to pay for all those upgrades, which was going to be in the tunes of about $30 million to upgrade just that piece of it. And then on top of that, to build the rest of the 230. Now, we would have seen some advantages of using the 230. We get a little bit break on that from instead of the 115. But council decided that that was way too expensive and that we should look at, as Lena described, this other route coming up through the south and coming up this way, even though that we know that transmission costs will be a little bit higher using the 115, but it was much cheaper than trying to go through Slack and then through Stanford and then coming up from that south west corner up there.
This is Kaylee Burton, Utilities Administrative Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, press star 9 or raise your hand now.
Why are we doing items not on?
On item 2. What was?
You said items not on the agenda. so
Oh,
this-
I
this is item
apologize.
2.
If anyone from the public would like to speak on item 2, please raise your hand or dial star 9 on your phone now. Yes.
For this particular.
For item 2?
The Clean Coalition, and we work on community microgrids a lot and distributed energy resources. So specifically related to this item, we just would like to sort of ask a few questions about, first of all, what the anticipated costs of this are, what the reduced peak load growth would need to be in order to avoid the need for this additional transmission line. And just the background is that community microgrids can provide both or all of economic, environmental, and resilience benefits. In particular, the resilience benefits are unparalleled with compared to anything currently on the grid. And so we would encourage that these options be considered in order to reduce that anticipated growth, load growth, and sort of are curious about how those costs would measure up and whether they are planning to be paid upfront or whether they're just going to be added to the transmission costs of the energy. So it's a bit of a multi-part question, but yeah, in general, just what the anticipated costs are and what the required load reduction would need to be in order to consider not having to add this transmission line.
Yeah.
Thank
Do I address that question? What's the process here?
Who asked the question? Who
I'm
asked?
happy. This is Lena
Okay.
Perkins.
I'm sure you can go ahead and answer the question.
Yeah. You know, the anticipated required peak load reduction is 30 to 40 megawatts. So very large. And costs are still being evaluated. It depends on which path. You know, the cost to Palo Alto's, you know, for capital will essentially be the cost of upgrading the receiving substation, and the transmission costs will be spread across the across all ratepayers, and the additional load will help to lower those costs. So, you know, the volumetric costs rates for transmission will be about the same. So some maybe around $5 million to the substation upgrade, but again, that depends on things that have not been decided with the routing.
Yeah, we know that, I read the plan, so I know that distributed energy resources will be addressed later. So, but yeah, appreciate that information. Thank you.
I think if I just wanted to add one other thing that Lena was mentioning, it wasn't really looking at the reduction of load of what it was. It's more about the reliability of the entire system throughout Palo Alto. Since we know that, yes, you know, it happened in 10, but there's always that chance being in that line of sight from the planes, but coming up the other way. So it was more about what can we do about getting just another line for the reliability aspect when we first talked about it.
I see. Yeah. So, I mean, community microgrids really are set apart from other options in the resilience side,
Yep.
but they, you know, are often not sized to provide resilience for the entire city. So I guess that's where the disconnect is, where you need more reliability for if, you know, the main power source were to go offline. Am I understanding that correctly? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, back to the commission. Go ahead.
Okay, I had a question, and sorry for not knowing if this is a reasonable question, but are there other ways to reduce the risk of the planes on the current corridor? For example, I know we underground, you know, the whole foothill section. I don't know if there's any possibility to create a more safe way than overhead lines through the exact same corridor. And then if so, would we be able to source more power through that same corridor and be able to use the existing infrastructure that we have?
I mean, go ahead, Dean. I was just going to say that it's probably not close to cost competitive to do, you know, this is probably the least expensive option for all ratepayers, including Palo Alto's, to have a secondary corridor, either, you know, from the west, from Stanford, which is not subject to any process that there's any, you know, daylight in, or from the south through the ISO process.
Also to add is that the biggest piece is that we don't own those lines. Those are PG&E lines. So we would have to work with PG&E to ask them to think about, you know, coming out of Ravenswood, which is up north, and then come all the way down into their substation, which is right next to ours at Colorado, and underground that whole entire run. So my guesses are they're going to probably tell us no, they're not going to want to do that. But that would be the biggest hindrance on that. That would be the only way that I think that we could protect those lines coming through there. Since it kind of goes through some residential, it's not like you could get it lower to the ground portion out in the marshes, but it would have to be, the best way would be underground, but PG&E would probably tell us no.
I will say that just with respect to the airplane risk, that longer runways have more time for pilots to make different choices. But, you could get more traffic if the runway were longer. So I think I'll just end my comment there.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Perkins, one question. In packet page 38, it says staff is working with CAISO and PG&E, but no definitive progress has been made. In your view, what do you see as the main barrier to moving this forward and making progress?
Yeah, well, prior to the load growth, we were told by the ISO, who is essentially PG&E's boss in this, PG&E is the transmission owner and builder, and ISO is the decision maker. We were told by ISO to more or less keep throwing our project in the hopper and hope that it gets picked up in 3 to 4 years, because there were so many higher priority transmission upgrades in their view, and per FERC and NERC reliability standards. With the load growth, we are in a completely new category and ball game, and so we are getting a lot of responsiveness from both CEC and ISO, and we are going through the same process that Santa Clara Silicon Valley Power went through, and they are having a lot more load growth than us. They're essentially going up 8 to 10-fold in a matter of 10 years, and we're going up 50% potentially in a matter of 5 to 10 years. But we are following the same process with working with the CEC and then coordinating with the ISO that Santa Clara did, and their process was successful in getting 2 new high voltage transmission lines approved to Santa Clara to serve that load. So we have similar drivers being mostly commercial and mostly large data center load growth driving it.
Alan Curatori, Chief Operating Officer, since she did mention my previous employer, I feel compelled to chime in at this point. First, I believe packet page 38 is actually item 4, so I'm not sure if we should be talking about.
It is item 4, but it references.
It is referenced as well. So I will address if that's helpful. So Santa Clara did go through the CEC process for submitting its load forecast. And then after adoption, the CAISO looked at mitigation projects to deal with the load. So the load growth in Santa Clara, near and dear to my former heart, was actually doubling the load in terms of the peak, going from around 760 to 1200, 1300, depending what transmission planner you talk to. So there's a significant increase in capacity. Driven by data centers, driven by electrification. Palo Alto would go through a very similar process. We would submit our load growth forecasts in terms of our growth, in terms of electrification, data center growth, and other developments, and then bring that forth as part of that process. So there is a template or guidebook that we could use for Palo Alto as well.
Is Santa Clara already gone to 1,300, or is that the projected growth?
That would be with the additional, as Lena has mentioned, that with the additional 2 new lines coming from the CAISO. One was a northerly line coming from Newark substation from PG&E, and then the one from Metcalf Energy Center in South San Jose. LS Power was selected to actually build those lines.
But to boil this down, we think the barrier is bureaucratic, and we think if our load forecast is accepted, we can get past that. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that has been described by staff in terms of looking at our load forecast. It's something that we will have to revisit, and we submit those annually in terms of we can submit those annually to the CEC in terms of our projections.
So a lot depends on the CEC going along.
The adoption of those load forecasts in combination with their forward-looking graphs in terms of electrification for the state as well. And then they would prioritize those projects based on deficiencies in the systems.
Okay, great. Thank you all.
And
Well-
I'll just add, there are public reports, and while Alan, our esteemed new COO, which I really appreciate his context and clarity, talked about a doubling of the peak. I was talking about the overall energy going up, and it's already gone up more than double overall from an annual energy basis. So, but yes, same process. And we have submitted our load forecast to the CEC, and we're in the process of iterating with them so they can understand it and understand the assumptions behind it.
I think this sounds to me like kind of a two-stage process. We need to understand, if we need this capacity to meet the FERC requirements, reliability requirements, then we can decide, where do we put it in the current corridor, or do we do the new corridor to the south, which seems like a reasonable decision, but kind of an economic decision. But I'm a little skeptical of doing it just on reliability grounds without some more information. So saying, oh, planes could crash and they might hit it, but it's been there for, I don't know, 60 years, right? The single corridor, maybe, I'm just making up a number, but it's been there a really long time. And I don't see that there's suddenly urgent that we need to do this. So, I guess I would say, yeah, let's look at what we need for FERC reliability requirements to build, and then come back and make the case for it. I think it's a really strong case relative to building in the current corridor, both on reliability grounds and presumably economic grounds, but I'd like to see both of them. What's the economic difference, and what are the dangers? It's, I guess, much safer to be near Moffett Field and Palo Alto Muni Airport is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that we are choosing the path where we pay the least as Palo Alto, but we have the least control over which solution is chosen. And so we, Santa Clara showed that they needed additional transmission, and ISO looked at the broader region because we don't want to overbuild more transmission lines than we want. That would be inefficient. And they came back with different solutions looking at the broader optimization. And so, the difference in cost between, us going out and contracting with LS Power and getting right away and building a whole new transmission line, versus going through the ISO process and having that rate based is substantial. It's like a 90-10 split for if we have it rate based to all of Californians versus 10% for Palo Altans, versus if we try to, it's getting a new transmission line, new right of way approved in the Bay Area is probably pretty much a showstopper. So I will just kind of say that that we will have to work. It's going to be an iterative and somewhat collaborative process with the ISO, assuming that they acknowledge, that we require additional transmission capacity and that it is of high enough priority to rise to the top of the queue in this 2025 transmission planning process. So that's just trying to scope expectations. We don't have total control over this.
So one outcome might be they agree we need it to meet the FERC reliability standards and the projected load growth, but they don't want to build a new transmission line from Ames. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think
Okay.
they do not want it to interconnect to the current receiving substation. That is an unusual configuration for a community of our size to have only a single receiving substation. So I think, given the efficiencies of power flow and other load growth, we are more likely to put more work and engineering and time into, our local system. But that's where we have to work with PG&E as well to do some broader power flow modeling and really submit something that is workable to the ISO that they could potentially, just stamp. And then just also scoping expectations. Once it is approved, it is still probably maybe 5+ years to get built by PG&E or another transmission construction company.
And just one last question. If we have the two different interconnections coming in and a plane and one of them gets taken out, is the outage on half the city? Is that what happens? Or half the city be served by
No.
one and half the other? Or-
No, we would have a lower peak that we could accommodate for the whole city. That's
I see.
how that would.
So because it's totally interconnected through the.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's also why, it's definitely not a bad idea to connect to Slack as well. As Dean mentioned, the 230 kV would come with some additional benefits financially. And Stanford may be more amenable to that solution, given that they've experienced like nearly a week-long outage and many reliability problems since turning off their power plant.
To interconnect with Stanford, do we need Cal ISO permission or can we negotiate that with Stanford?
No, we just need to work with the Department of Energy, Slack, and Stanford. So,
Okay,
yeah, and we have been unsuccessful in the past.
thank you.
Anybody else? No. So I had a couple questions. Lena, I'm a little confused. Just want to clarify in my head. So we're continuing to work with Stanford, but I know we've been working on this for at least 15 years. I think it's longer. I really do. I think it's like 20. So, and that's only going to happen if things sort of change at Stanford. And you sounded cautiously optimistic that something may eventually change at Stanford, but that's really not the focus, right? The focus is a Southern interconnect. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, we do not have full staffing in engineering and operations, or we are not, depending on departures, how you classify it, recent departures in my department, resource management division. So, I am prioritizing the ISO process because I think this is a matter of some urgency. So I am making that choice, given that Stanford, negotiating anything with Stanford, even without Slack and even without Department of Energy, is a multi-year process. They have interest, they have a new transmission czar, and the former sustainability czar has left, and they've had a lot of turnover and they're having a lot of reliability issues. But that is just to get to the possible decision-making point where you are all aligned and then can think about designing, the upgrades required to this non-standard Department of Energy 230 kV line over the Redwoods is a multi-year process. It is not mutually exclusive. If we, I think one of the benefits with another connection to the ISO, I think one of the benefits to electrifying everything is that if you have one system, it makes sense to make it stronger, and that will, there are economic efficiencies for that as well.
I mean, I think you're making the right decision. I mean, it seems to me that we should go through the ISO process, and then if Stanford approaches us and wants to actually be serious about it, which I don't think they've ever been, to be honest, at that point, it may make sense. And what I heard you say is it may make sense to do both if that opportunity arose at a reasonable price, which it seems unlikely to me, but that's sort of what I heard you say. Okay, so on the Southern one, through the ISO process, our load is growing fast enough that at some point you think they'll approve it. It may not be in 25, but could be in 26, right? Is that was
Yeah, it's more about them agreeing with our underlying assumptions and us demonstrating that our forecast is real because they don't have any visibility into data center growth that doesn't follow any trend line, right? So that's sort of like a giant behind the meter lumpy load that they would have no foresight or insight into unless we tell them. So as soon as they believe our forecast, it should get approved. What level priority it is, it depends on how fast our load increases.
And Santa Clara's got approved, but their load growth was much, much more than our load growth, right?
Much, much more. Yes.
So where is our load right now?
Our peak was 177.
And
Santa
Santa Clara's is forecasting or at 1380. I was confused on that point.
I think it's around 600. There are publicly available documents where they show, where they're limited out by various transmission lines.
Yeah, but I won't be going to look for those.
We can send it. Maybe Alan knows what their
Fine.
current, what like last year's peak
Off the
was.
top of my head, Lena, it's around 700. And then through the publicly available documents, as she was mentioning, the LS power line will get around 1200 in terms of the peak to Santa Clara. After the construction of the high voltage DC line, the conversion station, the new 230 kV line going to their northern receiving station. So
I have a question about Santa Clara. Is the fact that their load is growing so fast lowering their electric rates? It should, right? Or is you just doing so many improvements that it's not?
Yes. Yes. And especially because it's very high load factor growth. So like higher utilization of fixed assets, meaning like 90% usage. Yes.
So that's what I was figuring. So I'm hoping that when we do this analysis on this, and I assume that FERC would require us to do it at some point, right? If we get high enough load. But I am hoping that we take the option that our rates at the very least don't go up because of this, but the load growth offsets the cost of doing this.
Yeah. I mean, my anticipation is that it should more than offset.
That was my hope. So I'm glad to hear you say that.
And again, not if we go out and build a transmission line on our own, not in the short term anyway.
Yeah,
So
that
it's like
that did not
assuming-
seem to me to be a smart move.
Yeah.
I never thought it was a smart move. All right. That's all the questions I had. Anyone else before we close this item out? Well, thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your vacation if you're on vacation, because I'm clear.
Yeah. On my way back. Thank you.
All right. Take care. All right, are we ready to go on item number 3? Overview of a council-adopted one margin energy reach code.
Kaylee Burton, Utilities Administrative Assistant. Public comment will be heard after the presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jonathan Abendschein, Assistant Director, Climate Action. And I'm here to talk to you tonight about the energy reach codes that were adopted by our City Council in June that are currently under review by the CEC. So these ordinances amended 2 sections of the Muni Code, 16.14 and which is the Energy Code, and 16.17, which is the Green Building Code. And what these ordinances do is they adopt local amendments to the state's Energy Code and the state's Green Building Code. Now, the city's allowed to adopt local amendments if they're stricter than the statewide codes, and these ordinances are. So back in 2022, the city adopted local amendments to the Energy Code and the Green Building Code and imposed all electric requirements on new construction and certain kinds of substantial renovations. The ordinances that I'm talking to you about tonight came in response to a Ninth Circuit Court decision late last year that led the city to impose a moratorium on its all-electric requirements back in February. Now, when the ordinances go into effect, and they're not in effect yet, they're going to amend the energy code in a way that will encourage electrification, but in a way that is consistent with the Ninth Circuit Courts, with the standards that were laid out by the Ninth Circuit Court decisions. They would amend the Green Building Code to remove the all-electric requirements, which we believe might not comply with those standards. And then lastly, they update the Green Building Code to align with some updates to the state's Green Building Code that took effect in July. And that's minor changes to the green building standards for EV charging. Next, sorry, stay on this slide, please. So what you're seeing here on this slide is an overview of the adopted local amendments to the energy code specifically. So when we put the moratorium in place back in February for the all-electric standards, we told council that we pursue an approach roughly like this one. And this is something that I think a lot of folks were looking at, but that San Jose, I think, took the first step on late last year. Essentially what happened is the states added a standard to its statewide building codes called hourly source energy. And that essentially serves as a proxy for greenhouse gas emissions when you're modeling the energy use for new construction or major renovations. Now, it's easier for buildings to meet the hourly source energy standards when they use electricity rather than when they use gas because of methane gases, higher greenhouse gas emissions compared to clean California electricity. And the ordinances adopted by council in June adopt an even tighter hourly source energy requirement than the state. And because these tighter requirements exceed the state's requirements by a certain margin, and that margin is identical for all electric and mixed fuel homes, some in the building compliance industry have started to refer to this as a one margin code. We're trying not to really use that term too much more, but if you've heard that code, that's why it's sort of building industry insider speak for this type of code. And we believe it complies with the standards in the Ninth Circuit Court's decision because it applies uniform standards across all building types. Now, the code requirements encourage electrification because to comply with the tighter hourly source energy standards that we're putting in place, anyone who installs gas space heating or water heating in a new building would need to install a lot of costly efficiency measures, as well as likely solar panels and energy storage to offset the emissions from that gas use. And they'd also have to spend the money to make their home electric ready so that it can be converted easily in the future. And that higher cost means it's most likely that new homes are going to install heat pumps for their space and water heating. And even those that decide to go with a mixed fuel heating system or water heating system will be easy to convert in the future. Now, it's worth noting that the hourly source energy requirement does not apply to gas stoves, dryers, or other equipment, aside from space and water heating. Although if you do install other gas appliances, the electric readiness standards still do apply. I think it's worth noting that during the moratorium, over 75% of new buildings continue to be all electric. And with these new requirements, we expect that percentage to be even higher. So we think with more outreach on the benefits of electrification to applicants, and we can look at other measures as well, like incentives and fees, if it's looking like we're not seeing high levels of adoption. I think overall we'll be able to push the all-electric adoption rate even higher than it was during the moratorium. So this is something we'll be looking at while we implement the code.
Could I ask a question on this?
Sure.
Yeah. what is the higher local requirement? What is the HSE standard that would be applied? Is it the Cal ISO average or the Palo Alto?
Yeah, so it doesn't have
Number-
anything to do with emissions of electricity. What it has to do is there is this hourly source energy metric that you have to meet, and this is essentially this is a metric that an energy modeling metric that looks at you use energy modeling software to model the building itself, and you use these hourly source energy inputs from the state. And I'm not an energy modeler, so I don't have, unfortunately, building division staff to be able to help walk through this, through the
That's what I was trying
intricacies
to
of this.
understand, though. The HSE number is a number that comes from the state. It's not a local
It comes from the state.
number.
It comes from the state. But it takes into account Palo Alto's local conditions. And when we implement it, and the requirements for the local amendments essentially say that you have to meet a higher hourly source energy requirement that differs according to different building classes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I
And-
don't understand it, but okay.
No, I know. It's challenging to walk through with, it's challenging to be able to get the technical details of it unless you're an energy modeler. So it's not something that I felt like I'd be able to bring out for this commission meeting, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah, I tried to read up on it. Didn't understand it. So,
Yeah.
All right.
Understandable.
Go on.
All right, so next slide, please. So we also have these amendments to the green building ordinance, and green building was the primary vehicle we used for encouraging electrification in the 2022 codes. But essentially what we're doing here actually is rolling back some of our requirements. We're removing the full electrification and or the all electric requirements that we believe conflict with the Ninth Circuit's decision, but we're going to retain the electric readiness standards. And then we're also updating the city's EV requirements to match those state building code amendments that I was mentioning. So in general, the standards in our green building code for new electric vehicles, they remain stricter than the state code. But in a couple of areas related to multifamily and hotels and motels, we needed to increase our requirements to match what was being put in place by the state. So specifically, our local amendments require 100% EV readiness in multifamily buildings, and that's stricter than state code, but we require fewer actual installed electric vehicle chargers than the state will require starting July 1st, or the state required starting July 1st. So these amendments are going to align us with those state requirements. And the issue for hotels and motels is similar. And then lastly, we asked for some council direction on whether to prohibit gas grills, stoves, and barbecues. The local amendments were able to prohibit gas grills and stoves and barbecues because it turns out they're not actually covered by the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, EPCA, which was what the Ninth Circuit determined preempts local agencies. And so we were able to prohibit those without being in conflict with the standards. Council did direct us to prohibit those. But there are other types of outdoor appliances that are not prohibited. So you may be able to get gas connections for other appliances like fire pits and pool heaters. But for gas grills, stoves, and barbecues, you really can't have any sort of a gas connection for those. You can still use standalone propane gas canisters. So, people aren't prohibited from doing a barbecue in their backyard. They just can't have a natural gas line hooked up to it, or a propane line for that matter. So the timeline here, next slide, please. So the ordinances were approved in June. We submitted them to the CEC in July. And what you're seeing here is a timeline that gave the earliest possible adoption. The CEC's actually wasn't able to get it on their business meeting schedule until September 11th. That's next Wednesday. So they'll consider it next Wednesday. I think we haven't seen anything that indicates they won't approve it. And we're looking at an effective date on October 4th to give people a few weeks to see for us to do some outreach and see the standards coming and adjust projects as needed to comply with the new standards.
So construction projects that are already approved, they're fine. It's the things right before approval, right?
That's right. Yeah, things that haven't received their building permit. Yeah. So the details of which applications are this is going to apply to or not is something that the building division is writing some detailed standards about that we're going to include in our outreach.
And just clarification, this does not cover indoor gas stoves.
No.
Is that correct? So the outdoor in that
Yeah.
sentence.
And that's one of the interesting dimensions of this is that these hourly source energy standards, they really only apply to space and water heating. So you can, if you get rid of if you fully electrify your space and water heating, you can really meet those standards without too much trouble, but you could still maintain your gas stove. You'll see really significant reductions in emissions as a result of that. We have, again, been seeing more than 3/4 of people going ahead with all electric anyway. So I think we're expecting that even if people don't adopt all electric homes as aggressively, that we're likely to see very little emissions from new construction as a result of this ordinance. Because people will likely electrify at least space and water heating.
One clarification, on page 2, it says electric space, water heating, no additional measures required. Does that mean someone could install resistance heating or resistance hot water? Without any other?
I believe
efficiency
there are other other aspects of the code that keep people from installing resistance space or water heating. Those standards are still going to keep those sorts of
good.
installations from going in as long as people seek a permit for them. We do have people put those in without permits.
Are you done with the presentation?
I'm done with my presentation.
All right, thank you. I think we go to the public comment then.
Kaylee Burton, Utilities Administrative Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 3, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone now. No hands raised.
All right, great. We'll come back to the commission. Anyone have any questions? I have a brief question. When we did this outreach to the building community, if you build an all electric home or, ones with at least space heating and that, are there going to be other unintended consequences, or can you basically build the same homes you were going to build before, but without a gas heater, basically?
Yeah.
Or space heater, or are there other things that you have to have less glass, or you have to, I don't know, there's all these.
Yeah, well, so if you're building a mixed fuel home, you may have, there may be efficiency measures like you're describing that people may need to put into effect. If you're doing an all electric home, you probably won't have the same tighter efficiency measures that might affect design.
So you say probably.
What's that?
You say probably. You don't know.
Well, yeah, and I think every building project is going to be a little bit different, and the design
So
choices
I would
that people make.
encourage you guys to look at that and see if there are unintended
Yeah,
consequences.
so
and then
actually
you
just
can-
trying to finish up the answer. So there's so we did though look around at the ordinances that have already been put out there for unintended consequences that have been happening with those ordinances. And we did find in some places around ADUs that there were some adjustments that we needed to make to our ordinance to make smaller ADUs to make it feasible for them to comply because they were creating design issues that were really hard for the architects to overcome. So we've made those adjustments that we were able to find. And as this ordinance will be in effect through the end of 2025, and I'm sure we'll identify other unintended consequences. I will say also that we did some energy modeling on specific Palo Alto applications that have come in, as opposed to the generic building models that are used in the cost effectiveness studies that justify these standards, just to verify that Palo Alto designs could pass these standards, and they did. We will almost certainly find additional issues over the next year and a half. And fortunately, we're starting the planning process for the next 3-year code cycle, and that'll give us an opportunity to fix any of those issues.
Is this just for residential or is it for,
All building types.
so it's all buildings?
It's all buildings, although industrial buildings, because of the complexities of process heating, they have the same standards as the state. They don't have any additional local requirement. So there's a small subset.
Jonathan, thank you so much. Just a quick question about the outreach process between the time that, this gets passed and are approved by CC and gets implemented by Palo Alto. I think that there's certainly an opportunity to disseminate the latest research on the benefits also of
Yes.
full electrification, including the elimination of indoor air pollutants associated with natural gas stoves. So I'm sure that will be part of your outreach efforts, but I would just encourage you to make that sort of information available to Palo Alto citizens.
Yes, we're developing a pamphlet on the benefits of full electrification and resources for that to hand out at the development center.
Is there also an opportunity to provide you mentioned briefly that you'd explore incentives if you aren't seeing high rates of electrification. Can you share a little bit more about what other communities have done from an incentive-based perspective and how effective that's been?
I don't have an answer for you on that. It's typically it's a good question. I'm going to have to go back and look. Typically, communities and utilities don't offer incentives for new construction. There have been instances when it has made sense, but as the codes have evolved to become stricter, that's become less and less of a thing. There are only 3 communities, as of the time that we went to our council, there were only 3 other communities that had looked at a code like this. And only one of them, the city of San Jose, actually had really the ability to offer incentives for new construction. The others really rely on their CCAs and their utilities, and I haven't seen movement from them to offer those incentives. And I don't believe, so San Jose, when we talked with them, they said that just having this standard in place was enough to drive they said I'm sure there are a few mixed fuel homes out there, but it drove all their new construction all electric. So I think we're hopeful that this will do the job.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you,
All right.
Jonathan. That was great.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And I think that brings us to item number 4. Implementing reliability and resilience strategic plan, review of consulting scope of work to scope projects to enhance resiliency.
Jonathan Abendschein, Assistant Director, Climate Action, again.
Welcome back.
Thank you. And I just want to note that we have Shiva Swaminathan here, who's the project lead for this effort. So can I get the slides, please? Thanks. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit, if you could just go to the next slide. this is an overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. So last fall, you folks made your recommendations on the Reliability and Resiliency Strategic Plan. And council had a study session on that last February, earlier this year in February, and then adopted it on April 15th. And we've been throwing ourselves into implementation over the last few months, and we're here to give you an update. In addition, we want to get your feedback on the scope for a consultant to implement parts of the Reliability and Resiliency Strategic Plan. And as we talk through this, I think it's helpful to think about there being two phases to the consulting engagements that we're talking about. The first is doing some cost benefit analysis and coming up with potential programs that could be implemented to promote flexible energy technologies and electrification strategies in Palo Alto. And then phase two is actual implementation. Next slide, please. So if you'll remember, the Reliability and Resiliency Strategic Plan, which was adopted on April 15th, it's intended to address the community's questions and reinforce our electric system's reliability, to modernize the electric system and make sure it can integrate new technologies and building electrification and new vehicles, enhance the capacity of the system to handle electrification, and then improve on its resiliency. So both being able to minimize the impacts of a major event and to look at the utility's role in helping individual customers maintain service during outages. Next slide, please. You'll remember there are 6 strategies, and I won't talk through all of these in depth on this slide. I have another slide that I think is maybe a little more illustrative, just to remind everybody. But I just want to point out that highlighted in green are the 3 strategies that are the main focus for our consulting engagements, and really it's strategies 4 and 5. Strategy 3 is something that we can implement mostly with in-house staff, but to the extent the consultant finds things that we ought to be focused on around barrier reduction for these types of technologies, that's something we'll focus on. Next slide, please. So what you have here is an outline of the Reliability and Resiliency Strategic Plan strategies. And the first 2 strategies really are focused on traditional electric system management activities. That's investment in our system. That's a grid modernization program, the second transmission line that you heard about earlier tonight, foothills undergrounding, and then operational improvements like recruitment and retention of our workforce, wildfire management practices, and developing metrics to measure our progress. And then we also want to look at how flexible technologies and efficient electrification strategies can improve on what we're doing with our system in the first 2 strategies. And I think we have general agreement through the utility that these technologies are beneficial. And so we want to make sure we reduce barriers to people putting in things like load management systems, circuit pausers, solar storage. These will benefit our system if they're on the system. And we've been doing a lot of that work in strategy 3. But then we want to ask ourselves whether the cost benefit is there for us to actively promote these technologies, provide guidance, provide programs to actively help people install these technologies, integrate them into our electrification programs, or even provide incentives. So that's what strategies 4, 5, and 6 are. In strategy 4, we do the cost benefit analysis to see if that, if there is enough benefit for us to proceed down that route. In strategy 5, we're identifying potential programs because the devil's always in the details, and you may have a positive cost benefit, but the program may just not be viable. And then if we identify viable programs and the council acting on the UAC's advice wants us to move forward with any of them, in strategy 6, we'll be implementing programs. Next slide, please. And actually, why don't I just stop there? Let's back up on that slide. Are there any clarifying questions about the reliability and resiliency strategic plan strategies themselves before I move on to the consultant scopes? Okay, good. Next slide, please. So the consultant focus is on, again, as I said, strategy 3, 4, and 5, and really mainly 4 and 5. We want them to evaluate the cost benefits, identify any barriers we haven't identified, and design and at a high level, identify potential utility programs we could do. We have a list of technologies here at the bottom that we plan to have the consultant evaluate. And we would like feedback on whether we're capturing the range of technologies that you're expecting the community to want us to look at. Next slide, please. So we have 2 consulting partnerships to cover these strategies 3, 4, and 5. And really, this first consulting partnership, which we're going to council with a contract on September 23rd. The packet's not out, so I don't think I can talk about who it is. This first consulting partnership is going to cover most of the work on strategies, on the cost benefit analysis and identifying the programs. We're going to have them look at the costs and benefits of these technologies and strategies in lowering our utilities' electric supply costs, in helping our customers achieve higher levels of resiliency and reliability. We're going to be looking at what's already available on the market for resiliency and reliability to help compare to what's out there right now. And then we're going to identify potential programs, and that'll include equity-focused or community-based programs, and the resource needs for various programs. And when we're done with that whole analysis, we'll take these results to policymakers for direction. Now, we don't have this consultant, because of the complexity of valuing the benefits of these technologies and strategies to the distribution system. That is a very complex analysis. And so, next slide. We're doing a separate contract. Right now, we're working on negotiating a contract with Slack to evaluate the costs and benefits on the distribution system. And that's very specifically focused on strategy 4, action 2. We've already received a grant from the American Public Power Association to fund this. And essentially what they'll be doing is building out a model of the Palo Alto's electric distribution system. They'll identify places where capacity is available for electrification projects right now. They'll look at our system under a fully electrified community and what sorts of capacity needs there are in that scenario. And then they'll take a look at how those 2 equations change. How much more capacity can we free up under our existing system? How much distribution investment could we avoid through the use of distributed energy technologies, flexible technologies, and then efficient electrification strategies like circuit pausers, circuit sharers, and so on. Next slide, please. So the timeline here, we've already reviewed the statement of work for the consultant with the SCAP ad hoc, the council's ad hoc climate protection committee, their working group in June. Today, we're trying to get your feedback on the statement of work, and then we're going to start working on the consulting engagements over the next several months. We ideally would like to be sharing results in the first half of next year, get approval from council in the fall, and begin design. That will likely mean coming back for additional resources to the council, staff and budget to implement those programs. And we begin implementation in 2026. Now, there may be simpler projects or programs that we can implement before then. And if there are, we look for direction to do that and get those programs going. But we think a lot of them will be implemented in the 2026 timeline. Next slide, please. We're also, the packet's going on September 23rd, or sorry, the packet's coming out next Thursday for the September 23rd council meeting. And when you see the consultants there, you'll see we actually are bringing on a few additional consultants as well that we think may be valuable to us in implementation. We don't have to spend any money with them, but we're going to hold them on contract until because they have special expertise in certain areas until we know what projects council wants to direct us to do. And I will say we are also working with another consultant outside this group that we're talking about tonight on looking at microgrid projects at the airport in partnership. So utilities, public works partnership that's meant to help move forward the airport's sustainability plan. So we'll be looking at a few different microgrid projects in that partnership, potentially neighborhood scale, at least assessing at a high level neighborhood scale microgrids there. So hoping to learn from that as well. In the process of getting feedback from the working group back in June, we did receive some feedback from the commissioners assigned to the working group. Commissioner Croft had asked some questions at the meeting itself, and Commissioner Metz had provided some comments on the reliability resiliency plan and the consultant scope that are in line with comments that you shared with the commission back in June as well. And I think that the consultant scope and the reliability and resiliency strategic plan itself addresses all of those comments. But if there are additional comments from commissioners tonight on the direction we're headed, we're really interested to hear them. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we go to the public?
Kaylee Burton.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I am currently a Slack employee. And so I think it is best if I recuse myself from this particular discussion item. So I am going to do that and depart for perceived conflict of interest purposes. Does that make sense? Yeah. Great. Thank
Well, it
you.
was nice
And my
having you.
apologies for the failure to do so earlier.
We no longer have a quorum.
Oh,
Yeah, we do, don't we? Do
you still have four.
we? Four? We have four.
Okay, get out of here.
You really scared me. It is.
All right, now we can go to the public.
Kaylee Burton, Utilities Administrative Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 4, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone now. We have a public comment. Caleb?
Round 2. Thank you for that presentation. So just wanted to dig into a little bit further into the economic benefits of community microgrids or solar plus storage, which is basically what they are. So we've been speaking to, I'm a community member and also working with the Clean Coalition. We've spoken to a few local CCAs, and it seems that the resource adequacy economic value for even 1 megawatt of solar and storage can be about, on average, $25,000 per kilowatt month. Which leads to $300,000 per year for even just 1 megawatt. So that's one example of some of the economic value of this technology. In addition, obviously every megawatt of deployed solar and storage in the area reduces the transmission costs, which are currently at 3 cents per kilowatt hour, projected to double within the next 15 years. So you get the energy without paying for those transmission costs. And on the program side, IOUs such as PG&E are now required to provide grants through microgrid incentive programs. And in addition, establish community microgrid enablement tariffs, which Palo Alto could look at emulating those sorts of programs as well to incentivize these technologies. That's a recommendation for one of the possible programs. And then going back to the resilience side, that's obviously something that the Clean Coalition has valued, and there's some literature on what the value of that resilience could be. So just going back to that, there's certain tech or strategies such as resilience subscriptions, which can be flexible ways for members of the community to pay for the resilience benefits that they would be achieving from these community microgrids to a level that they're willing to pay for. And then just back to the quantities, the sizing of these. So communities that need the resilience, such as communities in Hawaii and Santa Barbara. For example, Santa Barbara is installing 50 megawatts of solar and 250 megawatt hours of storage in the next 2 years. So this kind of thing, for me as a community member, I would like to see that sort of resilience in my community, and also, of course, with the cost savings and economic benefits. It's a very just sensible thing to pursue, at least from the standpoint of the research that we've done. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions? Go ahead.
I had some feedback pertinent to what you requested, Jonathan. Could we please go to packet page 52?
Okay, thank you. I'm there. Are you looking for the slides to be back up on the screen?
Yeah.
Janelle, would be slide 6 of the presentation.
There's no numbers on the slides. The title is Consultant Focus for RRSP. There we go. Yes, I wanted to provide feedback on the technologies to be evaluated. And there are three. Number one is conservation, which is not on this list. I think building energy efficiency is often the lowest hanging fruit. Certainly the work experience I had working in Johnson Controls with all sorts of buildings, that usually was a big factor before upgrading HVAC or electrical. Especially since we're saying that the number one electric load is building space conditioning. It seems like improving building envelope is a real high priority. And, just anecdotally looking at cheap construction of a lot of commercial buildings and multifamily buildings and older homes in the city, I think conservation could have a big impact. So I think it should be on the list and in scope. Second one is demand side management. This is kind of hinted at in the last bullet, outreach-based strategies, but I think it needs to be demand side management explicitly, namely a program that subscribes buildings, possibly through an aggregator, for specific, to make commitments for specific energy reduction when needed by the utility. Especially important here, what we're saying that about 80% of the load is commercial, as typically DSM programs target commercial buildings. And I've learned that there's a state program which doesn't include municipal utilities, this California Demand Side Grid Support Program, DSGS. And I'm not saying we should join that, but they're a few years ahead of us in this, so there's probably a lot we can learn from their early experience and, what works, what doesn't work. The third area, which is on the list, is microgrids. And, similarly, there's a California program, Microgrid Incentive Program, MIP, which also excludes us. But it would be valuable, I think, to look at what benefits they've found. PG&E is a big participant in that program. They've got, I think, about $80 or $90 million from the state for that program. And the benefits need to include financial, of course, such as cost reduction, peak reduction, and so on. But they're also, and they're targeting non-financial benefits, especially resilience, especially for important community facilities. Lena talked about earlier hospitals on the verge of evacuating and so on. So I think microgrids are especially important for supporting hospitals, police stations, fire stations, also commercial, markets, gas stations, and so on. So I think those are three that I'd recommend to put on this list.
So I can respond to that. We agree with you on all of these. The reason you don't find energy efficiency on this list is that this is an analysis we're hiring a consultant to do to develop programs that we don't already have. We've already established the cost benefit for energy efficiency. It's positive. We already have an extensive program and have for a couple of decades to promote energy efficiency in all buildings in Palo Alto, and we're mandated by the state to pursue all cost-effective energy efficiency before we pursue new energy supplies. So I think we're already there with energy efficiency, and I don't think we need.
I think I would push back on that.
Oh, okay.
We have a program which we call demand management, but it's not, what I'm calling demand side management. And the impact of the program has been on the order, I think, if I'm remembering, around 2 or 3% per year of our load. In my view, which I think, could say a professional opinion, that's a small number. And what I would ask a consultant would be, if we were really aggressive in that program, what could it be? Because, if it can have an impact to cut peak loads and that sort of thing, it'd have a big financial benefit for the utility and ratepayers.
Okay.
I just think that's a very small number. And I would push back on saying that we're, in the best of all possible worlds as far as conservation goes.
Yeah, I think it's a fair, I think it's a fair question to ask. How much more could we do with these programs? I think for this analysis, we're trying to establish the cost. We're trying to establish cost benefit, and I think we know we have a positive cost benefit for energy efficiency right now.
The point is it's non-linear. In other words, if we were able to achieve big things through conservation, a lot of these other things could shrink.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think. Yeah. I mean, I think we can. Yeah, we can take a look at. All right. So I think the request there is to see whether the consultant has any additional anything additional that they could do with energy efficiency. So scoping up the project for to do that analysis.
Especially if there are benchmarks. If we could find examples of utilities who had substantially bigger impact.
Sure.
What did they do? And
okay.
Is it feasible for us to do the same thing or something similar?
As for demand side management, that is included here. It's under grid interactive appliances. I think that could be clearer. So it's not, and I will say that that's actually a little bit limiting of a characterization of what we're asking the consultant to do. We're asking the consultant to look at automated demand side management. And that's not just appliances. That's, commercial equipment, vehicles, really anything that you, vehicle to home and vehicle to grid is, and solar and storage are considered separately, but all other forms of demand side management are included in this study. So we do have that. And then as far as microgrids go, we do have it included here. I think what I've heard about the PG&E programs that you cited is that they're really heavily focused on communities that are, at risk of power shutoffs. I don't know of microgrid programs that are heavily focused on suburban communities, but I think if you have information on those, that would be helpful for us to see as we think about the role of microgrids in this community. What I will say though is that I think we're going to learn a lot from these analyses we're doing at the airport about what it'll take to do neighborhood scale microgrids in Palo Alto, and I think that can feed into research that we do about what's going on in the rest of the state as well.
Yeah, maybe we can get some better information on that. I mean, certainly they have looked at places like La Honda where they have outages all the time and, try to use microgrids to improve that. But I was thinking of it more in terms of resilience for important facilities like police and hospitals.
Yeah. Yep.
So anyway, thank you for the feedback, and I'm glad those
Thank you.
were included.
And I also just want to note that Commissioner Gupta also sent a long, I think everybody's seen, we'll be responding to that by email separately, but we weren't able to get to all those questions before tonight.
I had a question on where utility scale storage might come in whether that's something that would be separate from this project, an analysis of it. Like I know there was some mention on, the distribution centers. Perhaps we don't need so many and they could be used for storage. So there was a tiny bit of discussion in one of the meetings about that being something we would consider, but where would that belong in here as an addition to the list, or is that something that the city is considering separately?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at that separately. It's not part of this consultant analysis, but like the airport microgrids, we are looking at the potential role of storage in substations.
Do we miss an opportunity to characterize the cost of that and the benefit to resilience of it, or is by not including it in the list?
I don't think we do, because we're going to be looking at all those same dimensions when we look at it in the context of substations. Just as we will be looking at, again, we're working with a separate consultant on the airport microgrid project. We'll be looking at all those same dimensions in that context as well.
Okay, so, but I guess, say we were to put in a bunch of storage, does that change any of what we're kind of asking this consultant to do, the baseline of?
It's possible, but since we'll be looking at all of these in parallel, there's no reason we can't use each of these analyses to inform the other.
We'll have costs.
Yeah, and I just want to caution against an expectation that the analyses that we do are going to be, tight, perfect predictors of the future. I think what they're going to do is give us some ballpark estimations about which are the highest probability programs. And so the kinds of shifts that we're talking about that result from the sort of the interactions between the programs, I think if they're large, I think we'll be able to suss those out without too much of a problem. I don't think we necessarily need to wrap them I don't think we need to try to model those inter effects in the consultant study. And if they're small, then, it's going to be within the margin of error.
Good.
So actually, one of the places I would be very interested in is the set of metrics that will be used and how they'll be applied.
Yeah.
So, reliability, how frequently the system experiences outages. I don't see many of these directly impacting that relative to the outages that we've experienced in the past, which have been caused by branches falling on lines during storms, that sort of thing. On the other hand, certainly the resiliency, I can see that a lot of these, like microgrids, would say, who's affected, the percentage of people that are affected. So what I'd like to see, and hopefully out of this, and I was a little discouraged. It was good that metrics were in here, but then in the larger one, that task seemed to have been dropped in the table.
Sorry, can you point to where
Yeah,
that?
unfortunately, I think I have a different numbering than maybe I got the older version.
Yeah, it's okay. Do you have the title of the, is it in the staff report?
Yes, so it was task 1.6.
Yes. And
Then when I went to the appendix, it was missing.
you're looking at the status update?
Attachment B.
Yeah, attachment B.
So
Yeah, it looks like I'm sorry, it's not in there, but I think we have a version control issue because I did try to add it in.
okay,
However, the status is we haven't, we're only just starting to work on that. And so I think what's helpful to us is to hear feedback about the types of things that you're interested in seeing when we're eventually done, but I don't have anything to report out on that right now.
well, I guess what I'm interested in seeing is numerical metrics that are not, green, yellow, red. This is good for reliability.
Yeah,
But ideally, a set of scenarios. I'm very disappointed that you're not going to have the perfect forecast of the future, but given that you're not, that, what would it look like if these technologies see this kind of penetration? And how would these look in terms of, reliability, expected outages per
Yeah.
year, resiliency, percentage of facilities, important facility, metrics, hospitals, and so forth. And on to supply and costs, what's the cost going to be as well? So very much encourage you to work with the consultants to supply that level of detail. Again, understanding that it's not perfect, there's no perfect forecast.
oh yeah,
But to say if we go this way and we think about this set of technologies, microgrids, we get them installed, here's the metrics for what happens, not, green, red, yellow.
yeah. So I think there may be two dimensions to the metrics. And that's something we're not asking the consultants to work on. That's for our internal staff development. So we have established electric industry standard sets of metrics, and we can dig in a little bit. What we're going to have to do to develop these metrics is dig in a little bit on the causes of different outages that we've experienced, and understand a little bit about what some of our things like grid modernization, some of the major efforts you're seeing in strategy 1 and strategy 2, how those are going to affect reliability over time and where we want to see those metrics going. So that's one piece of this. A second piece is a more granular look, like you're talking about, which is how do different types of resiliency technologies, especially around solar and storage or vehicle to home, how do those affect people's experience of outages? And that's going to really differ from, on whether you have access to that technology or not. Same with, the way that you focus microgrids. And the last piece of that also is understanding a little bit about how some of the aspects of the grid modernization project around networking the system more are going to reduce the scope of outages. And that's a whole other dimension, whether the outages happen, but then reducing the number of people affected is also one of the goals of the grid modernization project. So it's more complicated than it seems, and I think you've really highlighted some of the complexities of it, and I'll bring that feedback back.
Oh, thank you. I think that's exactly right.
Now you're on.
I think it's exactly right. I still do. And, that's where I think of having the separate metrics is great. Reliability is like, are there outages? Resiliency is how well are people protected from outages when they do occur? I had one other question, which is about the strategy number 3.
Yeah.
How extensive are you going to be looking at it? So, for example, one hypothesis might be that adoption of some new technologies is being held up because the development center is understaffed. Not in your purview at all. But is that something you're going to look at as a barrier, or
Well,
are
I
you going to
mean,
look?
so I might not be directly responsible for it, but certainly it's in the purview. I mean, if it
Okay.
affects if it affects our, our sustainability, or if it affects our climate action goals, then I think it is something that we want to look at. But I think actually a lot of the barrier reductions already happening in the set. We went through a set of discussions with both the utilities engineering team and the planning and development services, the building division, about these technologies. And we've adjusted a lot of our processes to take them into account. I'll give you an example. The planning and development services just recently, I believe they either just recently or are about to roll out a load sheet calculator that they use with electrical projects that takes circuit sharing and circuit pausing into account. So you can designate appliances that can be on the same circuit in the load sheet calculator, and it will take it into account when checking to see whether the panel sizing is appropriate. Our utilities engineering team has cleared barriers to adoption of these technologies as well. So I think there's been a lot of barrier reduction. We want to do a little more education and outreach for sure, but I think we've made a lot of progress on this front.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I had a investigation related to the resilience scope work.
I think you need your.
Mike.
Okay, got a lot of lights, just not the right one. I'd like to address an issue related to the resilience scope of work. In the PowerPoint, it says minimize impacts of a major event, but the details, this is packet page 44, says longer durations for community resilience not considered in initial studies, but may be added. And the issue I'd like to raise is I think those longer duration events should be considered in the initial study, and they should be as identified as major events, emergencies by Palo Alto Office Emergency Services, which would be a 1 to 2 week event. Particularly, I think it's important just because I think we really need to be addressing such emergencies, but also that these longer duration events are exactly where some of the technologies we're talking about would have the most benefit to the city. So I think it's really important, and I think 2 to 8 hour disruptions, don't even scratch the surface of what's important about some of these technologies. So I think omitting longer, real serious emergencies would just would just be omitting a prime dimension of resilience.
Yeah, so I think where we're looking at addressing longer duration outages is in some of the learnings that we're going to get from the airport microgrid project. It's really the kind of thing where that analysis on a community scale is so complex that we're thinking that boiling it down to one small area to start will be helpful. So that's the reason that it's omitted here, because we're expecting to address or to learn some things that will help us talk about these long duration outages more effectively in the airport microgrid studies.
I think that would be one approach. My thought would be might be better focused around important community facilities. But actually, I think the bigger idea is this is a perfect opportunity to tie our planning in with Office of Emergency Services planning and get the city, everybody in the city, government on the same page in terms of what we need to be prepared for.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about resiliency, aligning with OES is exactly, makes perfect sense. And I think we will be doing that as part of the airport microgrid analysis.
Yeah, I would urge that we do that because I think, first of all, it's just important. But second of all, what I think is going to happen is we're going to get to a point where we're saying, well, this might be a nice to have, but it doesn't really pencil out. And the reason it didn't pencil out is because the worst case scenario was an 8-hour disruption, which, it's not really that big a deal for most places.
I think also, looking
And
at
we're
those.
sort of back to square zero. We haven't really done the analysis.
Well, I guess the question is though, is that how far do you want to go out? I mean, we're talking about 5 days, we're talking about 6 days, we're talking about 3 days. I mean, I think the thing is that I agree with you that we should be working with OES. However, I don't think that this study is going to be going into that great of a detail because depending on what the severity of whatever this emergency would look like, that where we would be out of power for 5 to 6 days, that means that I can tell you from experience wise, no matter how much microgrid we put up in any building or anything else, is if there's no power and if wires are down or if underground has been torn up or whatever is going on, those customers or whatever area that we decide that we were going to hold is going to have to be rebuilt over a period of time. So I'm not really sure what OES is really going, looking at OES, they're on an emergency situation of helping folks. Our emergency portion of it is to try to get power or whatever utilities back up in a period of time. And I think that if we are looking at using a consultant that's going to look for long durations of outages, I agree with you. 8 hours, too short of a time frame. Totally agree with that. A couple days, I would think that that's where we would look at and we would stop looking at. And we'd also then look at, as Jonathan mentioned, with this study looking down at the airport, will give us some ideas around that 2 to 3 day window.
Well, and I think, even with the airport, I think we're even looking at longer duration as well. And I think also critical facilities. So the connecting up to the wastewater treatment plant. So I think that project, it's a good proving ground. It's a relatively simple part of the system. And it's a place where I think we can get the basics sorted out. Essentially what you're competing against there is the cost of fossil fuel generation at the end of the day, because you're not going to, you have real challenge. It's a real challenge to get a solar, as Dean was saying, a solar plus storage microgrid that's going to last you for 2 weeks. So looking at things that include internal combustion engines is a necessity, and you can clean that up, with biogas if you need to. For those short durations, the emissions are pretty small for the durations we're talking about, and the rare emergencies we're talking about. But essentially, what you're competing against when you're doing that sort of an analysis is the cost of having regular diesel backup generators, and so it's both. I think you have to bring in all those other benefits that, that diesel generators don't have, and some of the qualitative, customer experience issues as well around things like diesel shortages and things like that, to really do the comparison fairly. But at the end of the day, that's what you're competing with is diesel generators.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things where we have the technical, the utility plus its consultants has the technical ability to evaluate these options. And then it's up to the community through city council and citizens to decide if they want to go for it.
Absolutely. And I think,
and I think there's a whole bunch of the technologies on this list, solar plus storage, microgrids, which, have pluses and minuses over a short term, but over a long term have this additional benefit. And maybe the community decides it's worth it to have that additional emergency backup benefit.
And I think that's what we're trying to suss out with that.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
microgrid
And I agree
analysis.
with what Director Bachelor said, that, okay, I mean, we can debate how many days it is, but it's not 6 hours and 8 hours. And it's probably at least several days.
Agreed.
So thank you very much for.
So I had a couple questions. I guess when we say technologies to be evaluated, you have solar and storage to start with, right? I'm guessing what that means to you. So to me, it seems like there's several opportunities with solar and storage. One, there's the big solar projects, they build attached batteries to them and we buy them over And I noticed that a lot of those are being built currently. I think they're being built more in other states, actually. But I have seen a lot of those being talked about. And I guess that's really sort of outside of this. But I was wondering, are we looking at, solar and storage as opposed to just buying solar? Because that would be a base energy load. And then let me finish because I want to put it. Then the other opportunity I was thinking was, hey, why can't we just take an office building or build one and pile a bunch of batteries in it? And then in the peak period of, when power is cheap, feed off of that, and in the peak time. And have we evaluated that? Is the consultant going to evaluate that? Because that seems, if that's cost effective, and I have no idea if it is, if that was cost effective, that would be a huge game changer, right? Because it also, if for some reason the connection went down, we would have a bunch of storage, right? On an industrial scale. So that makes sense to me, right? So vehicle to the home for an individual person, great. My power, all my neighbors' power is out. I have an electric car. I have no idea how long my electric car is going to power my house and whether or not I can just have it do my refrigerator and a few lights in the house, because I doubt it would last very long if it just powered my house. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how much electricity you draw. So that makes sense. Vehicle to the grid makes zero sense to me intuitively. I mean, it might make sense, but maybe you could explain to me. So I'll stop there, but I'll come back to the rest of them, but maybe you could just talk about those things.
Yeah, I heard, so I'm not sure I followed the initial question that you were asking about solar. I did follow the question about large scale storage and the resiliency benefits, as well as the question about vehicle to grid. And did I miss one in there?
No, why don't we just start with those and I'll come back.
Yeah, okay.
The ones
we come back. So let me just address vehicle to grid. The goal with vehicle to grid is not to power the grid in an outage. It's to shave peak demand off. So it's not something that's really commercialized yet. There are open questions about whether, how it affects the vehicle battery to be charging and discharging the ways that you would need to. It can also be a form of demand response where you just stop charging or slow down charging in response to grid signals. So almost like an automated demand response, similar to what Commissioner Metz was talking about. So that's the value of vehicle to grid. Vehicle to home is very much about resiliency. It's about powering your home off that gigantic battery.
Right, no, I got that. That made sense to me.
And then as far as putting large scale batteries, that is something we look at regularly as part of our electric portfolio. We look at it outside of Palo Alto. We look at it inside Palo Alto. Both have benefits.
So that was my first question, was outside of Palo Alto versus inside of Palo Alto. I know I wasn't clear on that. That's what I meant.
So I think when you talk about putting it inside Palo Alto, the idea is that you're going to get some resiliency benefits out of it. And that's what we're analyzing as part of this substation project. So we'll be looking at the resiliency benefits of that when it comes to its benefit in terms of electric portfolio, energy supply benefits, in terms of reducing peak demands or looking at taking advantage of lower costs energy supply periods, which end up being roughly the same thing. I'm sorry. The other thing is resource adequacy, being able to use them for resource adequacy purposes as well. That's something that's regularly worked into our electric portfolio analyses. And I'm going to guess that Shiva might be able to provide us a little more detail if you want it. But I think what the point that you're making is maybe you can get both benefits by building them in Palo Alto, and that's something that we'll be looking at. We already have the information on the electric portfolio benefits. That's something we analyze all the time, and we'll be looking at the resiliency benefits through this substation analysis.
So I don't know if Shiva knows the answer to this, but the real question to me is, how close are we to making that work financially?
Yeah,
because that seems to be the technology that has the biggest. I mean, frankly, hooking up people's electric vehicles to the grid seems hokey compared to having a huge battery storage facility. You know, I mean, I doubt there's that many batteries people are going to do it, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I think it's good for the consultant to look at it.
The way the car batteries could be used is the car manufacturer has telematics into their cars, and the car manufacturer centralizes it and dispatches or stops charging them or discharges them. Tesla has done that when the grid was in distress. That's a way to do it. On a California-wide basis or Palo Alto in a very smaller scale. In terms of central storage versus Palo Alto storage, the storage devices are not the energy density is pretty low. So to get the cost of the batteries, their container loads, one big container has about 2 to 3 megawatt hours of battery life. That much of energy for that footprint is at a substation. We may not have enough space to put enough batteries to make a difference. That's the initial thought. The other part also is the economies of scale in terms of maintenance. The batteries which are built centrally are about 200 to 300 megawatt hours at a minimum. And for us to put that type of batteries in Palo Alto we won't have the space to do it.
So you can't build up like in an office building, take a 50-story office building and go to the research park and build a big building and put batteries in it?
Shiva, cost is a dimension here, right? How are we on cost effectiveness of large scale central battery compared to other alternatives that are out there right now?
Yeah, so
Is it
large
cost
scale,
effective yet?
Large scale central batteries are cost effective.
Okay. And so then I think what happens when you start talking about, replacing Class A office in Palo Alto, I mean,
I'm talking about replacing Class B office.
Okay.
Why take Class A? No, really, I mean.
No, I think.
Why wouldn't you take it somewhere? There's so much office vacancy.
Yeah, no,
I don't
my
think this is-
fault. My fault for throwing out the words Class A. That's but high end Palo Alto office space as compared to the sort of land where these central, outside of Palo Alto battery storage facilities are being built. You're going to that cost effectiveness calculation, I think, probably changes pretty significantly, right?
Correct. And there is hard capital cost and maintenance cost. These central batteries are minimum. We are trying to procure some of these batteries for our electric supply, and they are about 500 to 800 megawatt hours, which is about 100 container loads. So that you get economies of scale at that bigger scale.
So in my mind, how big is that? Let's say I wanted to put in an office building. Is that a 200,000 square foot office building? Is that a 500,000 square
We
foot?
can do some calculation. I don't know the answer to that, but it's one container load is about 3 megawatt hours.
Okay. I would encourage staff to look at this. I mean, look, my theory is this, is that office is dead. I mean, it's not, we've got way too much office. And, there's industrial parts of Palo Alto. We're not going to convert the office downtown Palo Alto, but there's probably areas of the research park where, they might be willing to lease, or you build one of these buildings. I mean, I think you have a lot of landlords that are going to sit with a lot of vacant buildings for a while. I mean, if you watch what's happening in San Francisco, the buildings are worth 15 to 20% of their pre-COVID value, and they're selling for that. I mean, you're getting $400 million buildings selling for $40 million. Now, I haven't seen that in Palo Alto, right? But it's not clear to me what happens here. And so I think we should at least figure out where we could put the batteries in Palo Alto and what that would look like and when it becomes cost effective. And I don't think we've seen the fallout in office yet. Because I mean, that's the only way. And I see data centers going up, and they're office buildings, right? And I first of all, I don't know, can you pile batteries into an office, or does that create a fire hazard that's, not worthwhile? We don't do that. I just have no idea. So I was looking for someone to tell me, no, Greg, that's a really stupid idea because batteries have to be spread out over land. on a one-story. Otherwise, there could be a fire hazard, and therefore you have to do it outside Palo Alto.
So,
And it really has to be at a scale, and then, but it could be a base resource because we comply that with solar and all that. That'd be fine. I'm just really curious. And that's why I'm raising this, because I'm wondering if this is something you should have the consultant look at.
Alan,
Is
do you have
how
any
can we make
thoughts?
battery storage work?
Yeah, I mean,
so,
it's a question.
I'll take a stab, going back to my former life. So at a former employer that I worked at, we looked at utility scale battery storage standalone on city leased property. So we have some information that is publicly available and could be shared. So it is external. It's not inside a building. You have to work with your fire department in terms of standoff distances and controls and what type of battery chemistry you're looking at and what type of manufacturer. So there are ways you can take a look at that. There's also examples of utility scale outside in the area. So one of the largest ones is at Moss Landing, where they have hundreds of megawatts hours of batteries out there. They've had some issues in regards to that as well. So, but they're in terms of frankly fires and some issues in regards to that in terms of their controls. But those, it does not go into typically in an enclosed building. What you typically see in the data centers is more of little standby UPS associated with that prior to the startup of the diesel backup generators.
So what you're saying is that you really think from a fire point of view, you probably need land that's available to do this, that's relatively
Yeah,
inexpensive.
so typically, as I think you mentioned, New Palo Alto has been a leader in getting solar for part of its, supply. You're seeing that shift now to solar plus storage for the reasons that I've already mentioned in terms of, congestion, pricing, peak shaving, energy arbitrage, resource adequacy. So there's other value streams associated with that. So that's what, where the market's going.
One of the things I think you guys have been looking at least I hope you have, is bringing the power in, from afar and also in Palo Alto. I mean, it's been my experience on this commission and all of that, that it always makes more sense to bring it in than to have it here. But maybe those numbers have changed. And if so, I think that's what we should do. I understand resiliency, and I guess I wanted to get into resiliency a little bit. In what kind of outages do you experience that would you expect to be more than a day? I mean, I assume if we had magnitude 9 earthquake, things would be down. But I'm not so sure what kind of resiliency we would be that would really solve that problem quickly. Lines are down everywhere, that kind of stuff. That's what made me think about it. So, the airplane takes out everything. I'm not sure that these are events that we would expect to spend huge amounts of money on so that we could handle them easily. But I mean, I'm not sure what you guys are thinking on this, because we talk about resilience, and I guess I want to know, what problem are you trying to solve? What is the issue? Is it a 2-day outage? Is it the 10-day outage? And what is the frequency and expectation that we're going to have those? And how much money would it take to solve those problems?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a twofold. I think that first of all, it's the frequency of the outages. How many outages and we have. And then the other
But
thing.
for how long? I mean, you do have outages, Dean, but my experience is you get those up and running within a day.
Yeah,
I mean-
but it's the day. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, thank you for supporting that. But, I would like to see us have less outages, especially if we're going to be going to electrify 100% of the city. So the goal would be is to lower that amount. As we talked about earlier with the grid mod, shorten the area of how many people are actually impacted at that point. And then I think the thing is that, as Commissioner Metz and I were talking, is that, the large outages that are going to be days and days and days are not what we see every day. Even our storms, when we see storms out and the trees are down and everything else, we're able to respond fairly quickly with those periods of times. So I think the twofold for me is that it's shorten the number of outages that we have and then shorten the duration portions of the outage, and the customer base that's being affected in that, so that when we do have an outage, it might be out for maybe 4 hours instead of that 8-hour timeframe.
So how do any of these technologies to be evaluated do that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really changed here is that these technologies have multiple value streams. So if what all you're looking at is the benefit, is the costs of energy supply from outside the city versus inside the city, that's just one value stream. And you're right, utility scale is almost always going to win. But when you're looking at technologies that may be able to provide a value of transportation alongside a value of resiliency, alongside a value of reducing demand in the community,
Take technology and give me a practical, choose any of them and tell me,
Sure.
choose one technology and tell me how are we going to lower the duration of the outage? Or, saying
Sure.
there's lots of value streams is just words.
No, I mean, every single one of these. If you have a vehicle at home and you have vehicle to home technology and you have an outage in your area, you have power to your critical loads because of that vehicle to home system. If you have solar and storage, you'll have power to your critical loads during that outage.
But
So
no
it
question,
reduces
but
the
that's
impact of the
individuals. I could go
outages.
buy a Tesla wall bank and
I think though, let's go back to the microgrid portion of it. So let's build a microgrid that encompasses, maybe 6-7 blocks at that period of time. So there are outage that happens within the inner piece. And so it's pretty much as we go now is that once that sees the outage, that microgrid would actually then relight that area up to where the trouble point is. And with technology that we're getting from AMI, we're going to be able to locate that at a much quicker pace. So that's going to help on the duration portion. But if we had microgrids built in different locations throughout the city portion of it, we'd be able then to most likely be able to shorten that duration, because once it sees we'll just say the outage hits, the microgrid would take over. It would be good, say, for maybe 3-4 hours. By the time the crews get out there, by the time that we're able to figure out what's going on, we're shortening down that number. So it's not going to shorten down the number of duration or how many we have, but it's going to be down that duration that I was talking about that's important to me.
Yeah, and I think you're sussing out something that's important here. So like Dean, I think like what Dean's saying, microgrids are the only thing on this list that are likely to reduce outages at scale, okay? But that's not the only goal here. One of the major goals of this whole analysis is to figure out how these technologies could reduce energy supply costs and the amount of investment and our use of capacity of the distribution system. And resiliency is one additional benefit, one additional value stream that affects the cost benefit. If you're getting resiliency benefits, the resiliency benefits of solar plus storage or vehicle to home, vehicle to grid might push the cost benefit of those technologies when you're looking at they might improve the benefit enough that in combination with the energy supply and the distribution system benefits, it all of a sudden becomes worthwhile for us to actually do a program to promote these technologies or to offer an incentive. So the goal of this analysis is not all about resiliency and reducing outages. In fact, that's mainly strategies 1 and 2. Microgrids are an interesting test case because they can reduce outages in a whole area. And when you're talking about these 2-week emergency outages, yes, that's what you're going to want to focus on. But the focus of this analysis is really about grid efficiency. Resiliency adds to the benefits, but it's not the prime focus of this overall analysis.
Maybe just to chime in, this is one of the reasons I really want to see some numerical metrics, because I don't want to see, oh, it's green for resiliency and green here, therefore it's a great technology. But, I share the chair's skepticism about some of these in terms of a vaguely defined concept of resiliency. What is it?
Yeah.
How many, often is it going to be, do we expect it to be important? How much will we be reducing the impact of this? And again, I do want to see it quantitatively
Yes.
because it's going to be balanced off against the supply costs, the grid efficiency. I'd also make one other comment on the vehicle to grid. The consultant pretty much has to look at it. It's a hot
I
topic.
think you should totally look at it. I wasn't saying you shouldn't.
I'm skeptical as well, but I've been to at least 3 different conferences where people are super excited about vehicle to grid. Yeah, I think there's a lot of barriers
It seems fatty to me,
all
but I could
sorts.
be wrong.
But the numbers you ask about the storage, the amount of storage that's driving around in electric vehicles is pretty enormous actually when you add it all up, and it could make a difference. The institutional cost barriers and that sort of thing are enormous. So I think it's, maybe the technology of the future, and it always will be. But I mean, it has to be looked at.
Yeah, and so I think that that when it comes to quantification, we're not looking at red light, yellow light, green light. We're looking at stacked benefits. Here's the energy supply benefit. Here's the distribution benefit. Here's the value of lost load. And resiliency is really squishy to value. There is no doubt about that. It's different for everybody. It depends on your business. It depends on qualitative questions that you might have. So we'll do our best on resiliency. I don't think that there's one objective way to get at it, but we're going to go out, we're going to look at the research.
Cost of reliability is a well-known concept, and I think it can be, I think you quantify it. I agree with you. It's arguable and you might need to use ranges, but
yeah,
again, I really encourage you to come up with a quantitative data-driven approach.
Yes, we will do a quantitative data-driven approach. I also just want to emphasize that there's nothing in this analysis that's prefigured. We may find that, and then we have in past analysis we've done of certain technologies that cost way outweigh benefits, and that'll be an outcome. And then we have to wrestle with that. And then the last thing is that the numbers are not the only thing that drive the decisions. There are also there may be community interest in implementing some of these technologies, even if the cost benefit isn't quite there because of some of the qualitative benefits of having higher levels of resiliency and what that does for the community in ways that were just difficult to quantify. So I think we're looking to create information and research that will support policymaking, but it's not determinative of policymaking either. There's judgment to be had in this whole process.
Fair enough. Any other questions? All right. Thank you for that. I hope you got what you needed from us.
Yes, this was really helpful feedback. Thank you.
All right. I think we move on to future topics for upcoming meetings.
Yes, I've been advocating for a look at the business side of our electricity consumption, which I was told would be covered in the Q4 report at this meeting, which didn't happen. I guess it's being pushed to November. I want to emphasize I'm still extremely interested in this. I do believe we tend to over-index on residential relative to commercial and industrial. And hope that we can have a specific discussion in that context or elsewhere.
Yeah, as we talked, Chair or Commissioner, the Q4 was the report that we would be able to discuss. So we'll have an open discussion about Q4 that has all the other numbers in it from the first 3.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, first of all, for filling out the schedule so well. So it's got a lot more on it, and I really appreciate that, especially all the things that are normal and what to expect over the course of the year, and then the things that you've added on as special topics. I did have one request, which we had talked many months ago about lead testing. I guess it was going to happen. And what's in my mind was that it was at schools in particular, that was optional. And then we talked to you and it sounded like we were going to actually do it. And then I see that the findings from the citywide lead service line investigation are going to be presented to council. So I just wanted to express my interest in hearing about those here as well. From the October 2024 meeting to council, it says findings from the citywide lead service line investigation. And I'm not sure that's the same thing as what I'm mentioning with this, the lead testing that we were going to be doing in schools. Could you let me know?
Commissioner Crop. So those are two different things, two different programs. So this one here is basically what we did was we're mandated by the end of the year that we have to actually go out and look at all our services, all our water services. So the piece that goes from the main to the box where your water meter is, that's what we call the service piece. So we needed to go out and actually check all those to make sure that there was no lead found in that. We are done with that report. Pardon me. We were done with that work. And then we're going to report that out and then we have to send it to the state. The lead testing program that you're actually talking about is an area that we are in the process of starting, where we actually have to work with all the schools. We have to go to the schools, ask them for a drawing or a map of their facilities. So we're working with the school board. We've talked to the school board a couple times. We need actually a diagram so that we can actually see where all their collectors or all the faucets are and everything like that. And then what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to go actually out to each of the schools and we're gonna have to test at each of those locations at that point. So we can, I don't know, does Matt have anything? Does Matt have a report or anything on that? Yeah, we could make it.
I guess, I mean, you could even put it in your.
Can we make it informational and
Yeah.
then you get a chance to look at it? And if you have concerns, then we can pull it since, I mean, the other thing is we could have a conversation if you'd like in December.
I'm not sure if it needs a full presentation or if it just needs a summary from you on what the findings were.
Okay.
I'm not asking for like a big presentation, mostly just I'm curious what the
Okay.
findings are. And then I did think the school thing was going to take a lot longer than having results right now. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yep.
All right. I think we're moving on to commission comments and reports from other meetings, events. Anyone have anything? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was a couple minutes late coming out of my housing meeting, which was behind that door, but I missed the minutes. And I wanted to note that in the July minutes, I was prominently displayed with respect to communication back and forth to council. So I just want to note that very happy to work on, with the chair and with the director on any kind of current changes that are there that you'd like to make. I can assure you that the back and forth with the director is very strong. And, Dean's just been great about reporting to us. And because of as you said, Chair, my usual presence here, but that was during council break, so I did take it off. The stuff that happens here, I'm able to insert into not just the council meetings for your feedback and verify that this was discussed for 2 hours or whatever the issue was, but also in the committee meetings, like finance. And that might be an opportunity for you to send a representative at some point to the finance committee to supplement the expertise of the director, because a lot of stuff happens there, particularly on something like this, which is very quantitative, very complex, and 7 council members don't want to hear 2 hours of it, but we get to do that in the finance committee. So there are ways we can adjust what's in place, and happy to do that however you guys want to do it.
And it would be great if, obviously not required, it would be great if you'd say to us, yeah, the next finance committee, I think this would be great if you send someone, and then we could work that out.
Yep.
If you
Yep.
remind us, because we don't always think about it.
Yep. And ditto, if you, Dean, want somebody to help you come to a council meeting, just as a resource person, not even necessarily planning to speak, but if it's complicated like this and council wants to go to boots on the ground, one of you 7, that'd be fine. We do that fairly frequently with the planning commission, less frequently, but sometimes with ARB. So there's a standard there. And it's just notifying the mayor in advance is the only thing that's kind of required there.
Yep.
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
for that, Ed. All right. I think we're ready for adjournment.
So moved.
All right. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you all. And thanks a lot for that, Ed. That was really helpful.
Thank you.